I got everything situated here. Let's begin with prayer. Our Holy Father in heaven, Father of perfection, our Father of love and grace and mercy, God, we thank you that we get to come together and study your word today. Through this past year, we have learned just how much to appreciate that and help us to continue to be grateful for the opportunities we have to gather, to study, to encourage one another, to lift each other up in prayer whenever we have need and concern, and to rejoice with each other, Lord, when things go well. Help us to always remember that part of our responsibility, part of our opportunity as your children is to be a part of the lives of one another. And we thank you that you have blessed us so greatly. It's in your wonderful Son's name that we pray. Amen. All right, let's go ahead and open up your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 5. 2 Samuel chapter 5. I'm always amazed at how uneven some of the Bible lesson portions are that we study, where there are some where there's so much to get through that you're not really sure how you're going to get through it. And then there's classes like today where there's really not a ton in the reading. And so it allows us to slow down a little bit and spend a little bit more time, hopefully, discussing some of the ideas that are here in the text. So we'll try to slow down a little bit today. I thought about adding some more in from the next reading, but then I thought, well, no, that really kind of all fits together well. So I understand why we have a shorter section here and why L.A. divided it the way that he did. So we'll just move forward and plow through and be thankful for the portion we got to study today. So that's the plan. We are continuing to study the life of David and talking about David becoming king. And of course, we have right here at the very beginning where David becomes king of all. So he was king of a portion for a little while. What was the portion that he first became king of? Judah. Very good. For how long? 7 years, 7.5 years. And then he becomes the king of Judah and Israel. And how long was he king of both? Okay, 33 years. Very good. So, and again, I find it interesting here, like we pointed out on Wednesday night, verse 5, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah, which is an odd, if you're just reading this from cover to cover, it doesn't really make sense why he's separating Israel and Judah the way that he does. We know it makes sense to us because what eventually happens? You have the division from, and after the division, there is a somewhat inconsistent use of Israel in the north and Judah in the south. But here, because, David, you have that same reference, which seems to imply that probably a lot of this was written down and gone back over on a later date after that division had happened. Excuse me. So he becomes essentially king of everything for the course of 40 years or so. And that allows him, he became king at what age? Anybody remember? 30. So he becomes king at 30, reigns, and again, I can't definitively say, does that mean he became king of Judah at 30, and therefore this countdown goes from there? Or did he become king of everything at 30? So maybe he became king of Judah at 23, I tend to think the latter because of the way other things in the timeline fit together. So he becomes king, and you've got him reigning. One of the first things we read of him doing is a good thing, okay? There in Salem, they are still, that city belongs to who? The Jebusites, which is why we get Jebu-Salem, and then that changes to Jerusalem. So that's where that name comes from. He basically right there in the middle of Judah, because we've all seen the maps, right? I didn't put any maps in my slideshow today. We know essentially where Jerusalem is, right? They've got foreigners living in a fortified city right in the middle of their land. Why? Never drove them out. So when David becomes king, one of the first orders of business is we got to get rid of the foreigner right in the middle of our land. And so that's what he does. He ends up going in and capturing Jerusalem. There's some interesting details in this story. For instance, if you look there, verse 6, the king and his men marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites who inhabited the land. The Jebusites had said to David, what? You'll never take us, And how do they say it? Yeah, I mean, you are so weak that the lame and the blind can repel you. Like you are so not a threat to us. We are so unconcerned about you and your army and you coming in and trying to take us that the lame and the blind, you will never get in here. Even the lame and blind can repel you thinking David can't get in here. Yes, so it's a walled city. It's not as large as it becomes later on, but it's a walled city. There are a couple of features in that city that make it incredibly impressive. Okay, it's not just that it's walled, but there's a really big detail in the story. So it's up on a hill, and it has a water source, and that's huge. Because if you got a water source, what also can you have? Food. And so you can't really siege a city that has a water source. Now, what we also know is that their water source, their water came not from a spring inside the city. How did the water get there? Well, again, I'm not sure that I'm accurate about this. I could be wrong. It might be a water gate that takes water out of the city, just as much as it could be a water gate that comes inside the city, which is what I've assumed. But Dallas has been there, so what is it? Okay. Okay.
Doesn't move it much, but it moves it from outside the wall to inside the wall.
Yeah, essentially built the wall around the spring so that the spring could be inside. And that, again, that's important because of what David ends up doing here. Is you've got a tunnel under your city walls. What do you also have? A way for someone to get in. Yeah, it's one of the great things about having a big dog and a dog door in your backyard is that your dog can go in and out. But what does that also mean? And anything can go in and out. And it's the same thing with this water gate. And so basically it's kind of an ironic story here where their taunts end up being the very manner by which David is able to capture the city. Again, what was their taunt? Even the lame and the blind can repel you. Well, I don't know that it's intended to be understood this way. I tend to wonder if David doesn't go, oh yeah, that tells me exactly where I need to get into the city, because the lame and the blind were known to be by the water gate. And so when he says the lame and blind can repel you, David goes, well, that's where I'm coming in. I don't know if he does that on purpose to kind of turn this around on him. I don't know if it gave him his idea of this is the right way to capture the city. But that's essentially what he does. As he goes through the water gate, gains access to the city, which is where the lame and the blind are. and he's able to capture the city. And we don't have a lot of details here about how he does it and all the rules and things like that, but he's able to capture the city, and that becomes a very important thing because this becomes his city. So David took up residence, verse 9, in the stronghold, which he named the city of David. He built it up all the way around from the supporting terraces inward. So when David comes and captures the city, he does what any smart person would do. Well, I know where all the weaknesses are in this city now because I just captured it. And so he essentially builds it up in a greater way so that it becomes an even more fortified city. And so he builds it up and makes it even stronger. So that in and of itself is, tells you something about David. What makes David so interesting to me is that he is not merely a shepherd boy who's just piecing things together. David is brilliant. You dig through this story, there is very little David is not capable of. He understands military, he understands tactics, he understands how to fight, he understands how to fortify cities, he understands how to work with enemies, both in a cooperative way and in a time of conflict. He is the whole package when it comes to looking for a smart, intelligent, efficient, effective leader. But the most important piece is the next verse. Okay, somebody read their verse 10. I think it's verse 10. Yep.
David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts.
Okay, that's the real key here. While we find ourselves impressed with David and his capability, and we're impressed with his ability to do, to figure things out and make things happen, ultimately, a lot of it, or maybe even all of it, goes back to God. God is able to do these things. Larry, you had your hand up? Okay. Yeah, he also has bad moments, so that is also true. So we'll come to that in just a moment. So, he is an impressive from a human. And again, I'm looking at this. If I'm looking at this from a human standpoint, he's impressive all the way around. He is just an incredible. You go from Saul, who's half insane, at least he comes across that way, throwing spears at his servants and throwing temper tantrums and chasing his enemies and doing all of that type of thing. Saul, who just was a disaster of a leader, to David, who everything he does, essentially, from a human standpoint, is impressive. Even verse 13, from a human standpoint, is impressive for leaders back in those days. And so you see a lot of success being granted to David. Not only that, I pointed out the fact that he also had the ability to cooperate with others. It's interesting to me, King Hiram, what does he do? Yeah, let me build you a palace. Like, it's not a David hired king, it doesn't read that David hired King Hiram because he wanted a really fancy house to live in. The way it reads is King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David. He also sent cedar log, carpenters, stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Not David sent envoys to King Hiram in order to get the job done. He has kings in other places who are doing good things for him, maybe out of fear, maybe out of gratitude for some service, maybe out of cooperation, hey, let's be partners. I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning behind it is, but King Hiram and Tyre, over the years, are pretty good friends with Israel. They stay in their territory. Israel stays in their territory, and they cooperate quite a bit over the years. And that's impressive to me. Janet?
Hiram also sent cedar trees and all in Solomon before he built Jerusalem.
Yep, absolutely. That was Tyre's claim to fame, is their great cedar trees and such. But it is impressive that he has such a community around him that is supporting him. I find David, just as a leader, as a study of leadership, a very impressive study. That being said, as Larry pointed out, he also did things that I wouldn't personally involve myself with. There in verse 13, somebody read verse 13. I'm not going to make you read 14 because I'm not mean.
Meanwhile, David took more concubines and wives and
Okay, I won't want you to read all the names, just because who wants to read all the names? But he takes more wives, more concubines, and I don't know that there's a complete listing of who all of these women were and any of that sort of thing. But that we look at that and go, not a great choice. Now that being said, you don't see him being condemned for it. There was the old law allowed for a concubine and how you treated a concubine, and it allowed for you to have multiple wives and those types of things. So it was within the keeping of God's law that he did this. I don't know that it is always the wisest thing to do, because we know, of course, with Solomon, we get a taste of how bad that can go, right? With his 700 wives and 300 concubines. So, I don't know that David ever goes to that extreme, but there was a sense in which a lot of times this was done as a way of creating peace between nations. The king or emperor of another nation would offer a member of his household to a king of another nation, and having that person in the house of your opponent, they might not be your enemy, but they are an opposing country, that created peace between the two countries. And so maybe that's part of what's going on here. It's a way of saying that David was establishing peace with other nations, and that's why he had more wives. It doesn't clarify, it doesn't identify. These could have just been Jewish women that he took into his home. And so they were just more wives. I'm not sure. It doesn't really clarify all of that. Yes? Yeah. Well, and I'll say with Solomon, the problem wasn't, I might be wrong on this. I don't understand personally the problem to be that he had all these wives. The problems were that he let the wives pull him away from God. He followed after the idols of his wives. You don't read David doing that. So yeah, David had multiple wives and he had concubines, but you don't read him following after if he took a foreign wife, which again, we don't even know that he did that. But he didn't allow the women to pull him away from God, which again, might say something to us about who David is. And so it is, from a human standpoint, David has checked all the boxes. And that's what I find impressive about him. He really is a standout when it comes to being a king and the things that he accomplishes from very early on, running the Jebusites out of the land and capturing that city and making it his own, and it is, as we know, essentially become the capital city. Right after this, we read of the Philistines, and again, I read the story of the Philistines and I go, oh, this could have gone so different, couldn't it? I mean, what's David's relationship with the Philistines at this point? Yeah, he had lived among them for many years. And not only that, I mean, he apparently was the bodyguard of the King Achish of Gath. So you've got him having a personal relationship or a servant relationship with the king over there. Do you think he probably got to know some of the Philistines he was living among? I would assume so. It doesn't really talk about that, so that's an assumption at best. So the Philistines show up, and the way it words it there, when the Philistines, verse 17, heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they all went in search of David. But he heard about it and went down to the stronghold. So it doesn't imply initially that they were coming to attack. They heard he was king. They went to find him. Okay, I don't know that, maybe there was friendliness there. Maybe they thought that they could have a cooperative relationship. Maybe they felt David owed them, and therefore David needed to give them things in response to them harboring him as a fugitive, which is essentially what they did for many years. I'm not sure exactly what the motivation is here, but David's response is clear. He doesn't go out to meet them in some sort of diplomatic meeting. He doesn't throw food out on the table and create a feast for the Philistines. What does he do? He goes to the war room, right? He goes for protection. And maybe, again, because we don't know the motivation of the Philistines, maybe that was because he felt they were coming to get him. They were coming to attack. I'm not sure all of that. Yes, Donna? Yeah, and maybe so. The way I read it personally is verse 18 follows verse 17. They went searching for him. He went to the war room, so they spread out in the valley. Like at that point, they went, oh, David's in the war room. Get the army ready. This is not going to, And again, that's me making assumptions about the text because we're not really told. But David is very clear that when it comes to the Philistines, is he buddy-buddy? No. This is not a cooperative relationship. And so they came and they camped against David. They spread out in the valley. And of course, David went and faced them directly with his army and defeated them. Right? So that's what we have going on here. And then second time, as Donna brought up, they spread out and they kind of recovered from their defeat. They came and they lined up to face Israel again. And David, instead of facing them head on, circled around behind them, or at least from the side, and came and attacked them from a different direction and won again. And the key to both of these is this: David inquired of the Lord. Donna? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he knew exactly what he needed to do because God told him. That's one of the repeated phrases through this early part of David's, reign as king, is how often it says that he inquired of the Lord. So you've got here, verse 19, then David inquired of the Lord, and of course the Lord said, attack, I'll certainly hand them over. When you see it happening again, verse 23, so David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, do not attack, but circle around the back and come from the opposite of the balsam trees. And so that becomes the key phrase for us to understand how David is able to be the kind of leader and king that David is. Here when he goes to battle, he inquires of the Lord. That's what he does. That's what he focuses on. How often he gives God credit for the things that are going on. And so you see that. David made a covenant with the elders of Israel in the Lord's presence. And so then you've got David being a part of that. Back in verse 2, the Lord spoke to David. You get, pretty much all the way through here, you see David and God interacting every step of the way. And that tells us just what an incredible and impressive man he was, because he was a man who trusted God. That is always the key to success. And again, that's what we've read back in verse, forget the number of the verse. David became more and more powerful, and the Lord God of armies was with him. And so that is the linchpin of David's reign. That's what made him impressive. And that is what makes him stand apart from Saul, who preceded him. How often did Saul inquire of the Lord? I remember one time. There might be more than that, but I remember the one time, which was when God was no longer answering, and then he went to the witch of Endor. When you get over to Solomon's life, how often does he inquire of the Lord? You get that early interaction with the asking for wisdom, but after that, maybe there are an occasion or two, but it's not a lifetime of there's no pattern of it like you have with David. With David, over and over and over again, God blessed him. He inquired of the Lord. He did what the Lord wanted. He did exactly things the way that God intended him to do things. And that, in and of itself, I think, is what made him such an exceptional ruler. The few times it doesn't mention him inquiring of the Lord, how does it go for him? Not nearly as good, right? But these times when he does, you just see the Lord establish and fortify and make everything work out great for him. Yes? Say it again? Yeah. And again, you see the people's lack of trust in Saul through the years, and then David steps in and like Meredith says, it becomes very obvious. The people recognize David's different. David does things the way they're supposed to be done. And again, that's because of his relationship with the Lord. Here's one of the few cases where you don't read of David inquiring of the Lord, right? In chapter 6, where he goes to move the ark. Okay, you've got this whole story. David assembles all of the fit young men in Israel. How many? 30,000 fit young men. He and his troops set out to bring the ark back. The ark bears the name of the Lord of armies, who's enthroned between the cherubim. And they set the ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on the hill. Now, how do we know David doesn't inquire of the Lord here? They put the ark on a cart, which is so clearly not the way the ark's supposed to be moved. How do we know the ark's not supposed to be moved that way? Yeah. Well, and so it has been moved on a cart before, but it was constructed with what in place? It's got the rings on the side. It's got the poles that go through the rings. It was designed to be carried. It was not designed to be carted. Okay? Had he just maybe read what the law says about the ark, maybe he would have known, well, there's a better way to do this. Now, that being said, there's anywhere that I'm not aware of anywhere that says, thou shalt not move the ark on a cart. Okay? It's not there. But it is very clear directions on how you should move the ark, right? Put the poles in, priests pick it up, they move it from place to place. And so that in and of itself, I think, displays for us, David didn't always inquire of the Lord, And again, it's one of those, if I have an army facing off, I'm going to inquire because I don't know whether the Lord wants me to do this or not do this. From David's perspective, if I'm putting myself in his shoes, Does God want his ark to be honored? Does God want his ark to be in the middle where all the people can come to, not its presence personally, but come to the tabernacle? Shouldn't the ark be in the tabernacle? Like, I think the reason he doesn't inquire of the Lord is because he knows this is a good thing to do. But he still should have at least inquired of the law, even if he didn't inquire of the Lord directly. Hey, God, do you want me to do this? Randy? Yeah. Really? Okay. I had not looked over there. So, yeah, well, that's the problem. You never ask the people what they want to do. That's never the right thing to do. So, yeah, I mean, and that is not the right source. They're not your authority. That's not what you're supposed to do. So he gathered it. They loaded it on a cart. Now again, are they trying to disobey? Are they trying to do a bad thing? No, I mean, they're super excited about this whole idea of bringing the ark home, bringing it back to its resting place, that, putting it back in a place of honor where it belongs, not in some man's house. And so they're excited. They are traveling along with this thing with celebration and joy. And you read the way it talks about it, verse 5, David and the whole house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all kinds of fir wood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. I mean, they're super excited about this. This is wonderful. Until one of the ox gets upset, and it doesn't say the ark starts tipping as far as that, but Uzzah sticks his hand out because he wants to stabilize the ark, is our assumption. And of course, how's God respond? Kills him, strikes him dead right there. How's David respond? He gets angry about it. Okay? David there, verse 8, was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah. And so he named that place Outburst Against Uzzah, as it is to this day. Such specific names for places back in these days. David, have you ever had one of those moments where you thought you were doing the right thing, and then the person you were doing the right thing for gets upset with you because that's not what they intended for you to do? And then you feel like you've been unfairly treated, or, am I the only one who's ever experienced this? Okay, just making sure. Y'all are looking at me a little blankly like, really? That happens to people? I remember back in our early marriage, my love language is gift giving. I love to buy gifts particularly for my wife. That's my love language. Not my wife's love language at all. And at that point in our marriage, I'm still doing things the way I think they should be done, not necessarily the way she would like for things to be done. And so, here we are struggling to make ends meet, and I'm buying her gifts. How does she respond to that? She at that point in our marriage paid our bills and balanced the bank account and did all that kind of stuff. And here I bought her probably a book, knowing her, that's pretty much all she ever wants. So, buy her a book, and it's probably the third book I bought her this month, and I'm doing a good thing, right? But she's not pleased with it because she's already asked me to quit spending money. She's told me she doesn't need any more books right now. But I'm showing love. Is that really showing love? Or is that accomplishing what I want to accomplish in the way that I want to accomplish it? And to me, that's the big difference here. I think David, his intention, his heart, it's in the right place. He wants to do a good thing. He wants to express love and appreciation and put God first and let the people see. There's a reason he doesn't do this with 5 men. He brings 30,000 men with him to get this job done. You think they needed 30,000 men to move a box smaller than this table? No. Why does he bring 30,000 men with him? He wants this to be an event. This is a big deal. We're going to have not just a little parade. We're going to have a massive parade of celebration and joy as we bring the Ark of God back to where it's in a place of honor. This was a way to give God glory. But did it give God glory? Not the way he intended. I do think it does, because it gives God the opportunity to treat or to teach them how to respect God's will. But it's not what David and I can understand David being angry about that. I remember being angry when my wife looked at that gift with a kind of a seething rage of, I thought I asked you to quit spending money. And I'm going, but I tried to do a good thing. But was I really? And so that I think is what's going on here. It sits for 3 months in the house of a Gittite. And God blesses that house while it's there. And over the course of that 3 months, what do you think David does? Do what? Probably reads everything there is to read about the Ark of the Covenant, right? What'd you say? Yeah, I mean, he figures out what went wrong. Because again, even when you have those moments, you still eventually go back to, okay, I did something wrong here. If I intended this reaction, but instead got this opposite reaction, something went wrong. How do I fix this? And I think that's what David does here. David goes back and goes, okay, how are we really supposed to get this done? And he, I think, reads the law, digs in, realizes what actually, it's got poles and rings for reasons. And so after the course of 3 months, they go and they get the ark and they bring it in correctly. Now, what does he do this time? As far as, does he do it quietly? No. He still does it with celebration and joy, okay? Because the problem wasn't celebration and joy. The problem was they needed to celebrate and be joyful the way God intended them to celebrate and be joyful. And so he puts on the linen ephod, and they bring it into the city. And every time, I find it a little, it would be rather slow going because they verse 13, when those carrying the ark of the Lord advanced, how far? 6 steps. He sacrificed an ox and a fatted calf. Why do you think he did that? Yeah, no one died this time. Woo! We did it right. It's he wants God to know this is for God. Right? That's why he offers sacrifices. He wants God to be pleased with this process. And so he offers the ox and the fatted calf. David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. He and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with sounds of a ram horn. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, he is super excited for what's happening. They are celebrating. They're bringing it home. This is as victorious and triumphant a moment as David ever has, because he is able to set wrong things right, which is what he wants to do as a king. Donna? Oh, yeah. Yeah, if he does it wrong again, who do you think is going to die the next time? He wants it to go right. Yeah. And isn't that what a good leader does? A good leader takes responsibility when something goes wrong. They don't blame it on somebody else. They go, okay, I failed somehow. How do we make this right? And it's just another good example of incredible leadership that David shows. Yeah, I mean, and of course, you've got this whole story here about Michal. Who is Michal? Okay, now again, when we originally read about Michal back in the beginning of the story when she is given to David, is she a good wife? Yeah, not necessarily a good person. She lies and has idols and things like that, but she's a good wife. I mean, she protects David, helps David escape from Saul's murderous rage. She does good things. But again, you got to remember, David's been gone for a long time. And David came home, and he ripped her away from her new husband and brought her back to his house, which was right. I mean, that she belonged to David. She was David's wife. But there, you've got her, do you think she's real pleased about the circumstances of life? Not at all. You think she's real happy with David as a whole? Probably not. And so David goes and does something ridiculous, and she's not pleased with it. I also wonder, and this is, again, my, probably putting things in the text that don't belong there, but I also wonder if there's not a sense of David is getting done what Saul could never do. Isn't he? How long has the ark been missing? When did this happen? Before that? Well, okay. Never returned home. So I'm looking over. Where is. Now I'm second guessing myself. Now I have to find it in the text. Say it again. Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking, that it's been gone since before Saul was king. Correct? The ark of the Lord, took it to Abinadab's house on the hill. Yeah, I mean, this is back, when does Saul become king? Not till chapter 9. So, I mean, this ark has been missing for 40 years or more. Saul was king for 40 years, I think. So, it's in Israel, but it's not been in a rightful place for 40 years. And Saul never went to get it. Saul never cared enough. It was my assumption. And so now David is setting all the things right that have been wrong. I wonder if there's not a sense of jealousy between Michal, that David is doing all the stuff her dad never did. David is the kind of king her dad should have been. Had her dad been the kind of king David is, David wouldn't be king at all. I wonder if there's not a lot of embitteredness going on in Michal's mind with just the way everything has worked out. And so she criticizes David and says what? Yeah, you're acting the fool, essentially. And of course, David's response to her is as blunt and firm as you ever read of David being, okay? David here, the end of chapter 6. Chapter 6. No. I'm looking at 1 Samuel, which is why I can't find it. All right, end of chapter 6. David's response is, it was before the Lord who chose me over your father. No, right there is a little bit of a slap in the face, right? The Lord chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will dance before the Lord, and I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more. Because what is she accused him of? Dishonoring the status or the state of being king. He uncovered himself. Okay, I don't know that he really did. It depends on how you understand what an ephod is. Some people picture an ephod as being like an apron. And so some people assume that David is literally looking like the Vulcan up on the in Birmingham. All he's wearing is an apron. I don't know that that's true because I can't come up with a good reason as to why he would have dressed like that. He's wearing a linen ephod. That was not a kingly garment. That was a servant's garment. And I kind of wonder if that's not what she's saying here, is that you are dishonoring yourself. You should be dressed in regal clothes. You should be presenting yourself with decorum. You should be acting responsible. You shouldn't be out in the streets dancing. Okay, I wonder if that's more of the criticism here. But David, I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more. Why? Because of the Lord. However, by the slave girls you spoke about, I will be honored. Okay? What slave girls is he speaking of? Yeah. I wonder if there's not an implication here of how he is going to consider her from now on also. That he's not just saying that those slave girls down on the streets will honor me, so quit worrying about it, it's okay. I kind of wonder if the brash response isn't, I will be honored by slave girls, and if there's not an implication there. We do know that the very next statement is what? She never had kids. Well, why is that? The implication is he quit acting like she was his wife. Okay? And so it's a bold response, is it not, that David has here? Because, again, one of the things you notice about David again and again, as many mistakes as he makes over the years, he's not always perfect. But the one thing he is passionately devoted to continually is he will let nothing stand in the way between him and him worshiping his God. I mean, the first place he goes when he goes on the run is where? Tabernacle. The first thing he does when he comes in to be king is he reestablishes a covenant with the elders of Israel or of Judah. Over and over and over again, what David's first thing to go to is worshiping his God, a covenant with his God, his responsibility to his God, inquiring of the Lord. And I wonder if this isn't his way of saying, you know what? You will not stop me from serving my God the way I know I need to serve him. And it's just an impressive attitude on David's part. Something probably all of us need to think about and dwell on a little bit. So anyway, thank you for your time. Next for Wednesday, chapter 7 through 9. So make sure to read that.